Hello, viewers. Welcome to Social Justice Action Research Alliance. On this platform, we talk about things that impact social justice locally and globally. The Alliance consists of a group of academics, activists, artists, writers, poets, and professionals of various backgrounds from around the world who deeply care about protecting and promoting the rights of marginalized groups. We take an active interest in social justice and equity issues. Our goal is to engage in critical conversations that initiate actions to build global solidarity needed for social justice and make the world a more equitable, kind, and compassionate place. Today, our guest is Dr. Joshua Black. Dr. Joshua Black is not only a scholar, a personal friend of mine. I met Joshua when I went to Canada for my postgraduate studies. And our topic of conversation is unpacking grief, loss, and dreams amid global pandemic. Dr. Joshua Black is a grief dream researcher, speaker, author, and host of Grief Dream podcast. He has focused all of his MA and PhD research in psychology on investing grief dreams from many types of loss, including parental loss and pet loss. The majority of his research on grief dreams has been specifically on dreams of the deceased. Due to the lack of academic research in this field, Joshua has focused his efforts on raising awareness on grief dreams through doing talks, workshops, and interviews. Additionally, he developed a grief dreams website, www.griefdreams.ca, runs several social media accounts, and wrote a children's book on grief dreams, Dreaming of Owl. Joshua, welcome to our conversation, and it's a true honor and privilege to have you. And we have had conversation almost like 7 years ago on a podcast. So I've grown gray hair, and you have grown younger. So that's the only difference.
I didn't know if that gray hair was real or not, because now you have that dye, and you can buy like gray dye in your hair. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what kind of look you're going for.
Yeah, this is real gray hair. Before we actually start the conversation, I wanted to know a bit about your personal journey. That your area of research, your area of expert is very unique, and I haven't come across one other research in the field of psychology or any other field who look into this specific niche. Wanted to know, how did you get into this?
How much time do we got?
We have some time.
Okay. So I wouldn't say it was by choice, really. It was like life takes you on this path, and I feel that I was just being pushed along towards it. And so the biggest thing was I had to first experience loss to even have one of these types of dreams after loss. And for me, I had a pretty good childhood in the sense that I didn't have any meaningful losses while I was a kid. And my first real loss came when my father died. And that was when I was 24. So I was at Brock in my undergrad in my second last year when he died. And it was such a shock to me, because it wasn't like he was in the hospital. It was a sudden loss. And the day that he died, we were supposed to go to a hockey game, and he just never showed up. And I never once crossed my mind that he could be dead. It just wasn't a possibility. I wasn't in that sort of sphere. Now, and someone doesn't call me, I'm like, did they die? I'm like, it's so relevant now to my life and how we're mortal or immortal or mortal. So the biggest thing for me was when I experienced that his death. I got a phone call the next 2 days later, actually, that he died. I broke down. I didn't know what I was experiencing. The amount of emotions that were coming from me was so scary. I was just crying. I was in like panic. I didn't know how to cope with it. Like, I never dealt with that type of emotion before. And I went through a phase of depression afterwards, because I went back to school like a good academic would, right? Finished that degree off, and I just wasn't myself. Like, the world was gray, and I didn't know, like, you have friends, but they don't really know what to say either, because they haven't suffered that type of loss yet. And so you're really, especially in two, like, I was, a typical guy. And at that time, I wasn't really exploring my emotions, my feelings as much. So I would say I was lost till about 3 months later, when I had a dream, and I wasn't asking for one. it just happened. And I was in the dream, I was in my room, and I saw my dad at the end of my bedroom, and he was wearing these like promotional T-shirts that he used to always get from like the beer cases or
Mhm.
whatever. So he wasn't dressed all in white or anything. That's what he would like typically wear. But he was
Mhm.
looking peaceful and he was looking really healthy. And
Mhm.
I should say his life was just full of, I'd say, trauma and pain. And so I never really saw him in that kind of light before. So this for me was more than a memory. This was something different. And I saw him and I got excited and I went up to him and I said, Dad, I'm going to miss you, acknowledging the loss. And then I said, I love you. And we hugged and I woke up. And the craziest thing was when I woke up, that darkness, that depression was gone. And to this day, I still don't fully understand what happened and why it changed because, like, how can a dream change me that much? I wasn't seeking one, like, I need a sign or something. It just happened. And I woke up changed. And I was able to regulate my emotions from there on out. I still cried and I still, like, mourned more, but that darkness was gone. And, like, I do look back and say maybe because I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. So that was an issue. But also the fact that I was able to say, I love you. And when I look back at, when I told my dad I loved him, probably was when I was a kid, like 5, 6. Like we just never said that to each other. He never said it to me. I never said it to him, and that was just like the male roles that I was portraying. And so I think I needed to express that in some way, and that also probably helped a lot to sort of unlock whatever that was I needed to unlock to sort of start processing the grief because at that point I wasn't really processing it. To tell you the truth, too, I wanted to drop out of school after he died. I said, like, not knowing how to process grief, I was thinking some wild stuff. Like, I wanted to go to, because he just went to Israel, and one of his last trips, or one of the last things that we talked about was he wanted to take me to Israel. So, my big plan was to drop out of school and use that money to go to Israel. And that would be it, right? Like, I wasn't thinking like long term, because that would have been a horrible decision. But I had a girlfriend at the time that really sort of tried to keep me back on track and to not act irrationally. Um, and that was good because I needed to finish school because look at me now, like I was able to do meaningful research throughout. So after that loss, I had that dream. I didn't tell anyone about it. I was changed, but I didn't share that with anyone. I still don't know why. It just never, maybe no one asked. Maybe that's what it is. No one was asking about my grief anyway. So like, why would I tell them about a dream? So I, uh, I just went back to school, finished um, my BA, and I was going to go to teachers college, but then once I got in, it just didn't feel right, and so I declined. And so, for me, my dad always wanted me to be a elementary school teacher. He said they had good pensions and that's the way to go. I still don't know what a pension is, but that's okay. I'm just sorry, Dad. But yeah, it's not. But but I was just following my heart, and it just didn't feel right anymore. And so um, I was at that time I was also kind of lost because what am I going to do? The jobs I was looking at didn't seem very meaningful. They kind of sold me on a lie that you could do more with a psychology degree than you actually could. You need sort of like a master's for the things that I really wanted to do. So I what did I do? I think I just tried to find work, and then I went to volunteer because I'm like that's something I've always done, and that always brought me joy. So I started to volunteer with the bereaved, and they kept talking about these dreams. So either in group or in one-on-one, and I didn't know anything about them except the one I had. But they're having negative dreams. Some people weren't having dreams, and they wanted them. And as a good academic, I went to the research saying, "Oh, there's got to be some stuff here for them to help them out," and there wasn't anything, and that really shocked me. And so I had a decision to make: do I just continue this path where you wait for someone to do meaningful research in this area, or do you take the reins and do it yourself? And so I had had some courage and decided to do it. And the crazy thing is, like when I look at my life, I never wanted to do stats. I didn't like it. I wasn't trained in it. in any like in a great way. So for me to decide to go this route took a lot of courage because I was 10 steps behind everyone else that was going in. And so the learning curve was steep if I got in. And so I got in, which is great. And where I was at the time was I was living in Oshawa at the time. And there was a university there, Trent University. And I just looked at what kind of people in the psychology department, what they were researching. And one person was actually researching dreams, which that's very rare to have anyone have dreams. So it was a great easy decision for me to go to that school, and then they accepted me to do that. But when I was in that school, I really saw the different biases and the issues that people go through that are grieving when it comes to this topic, and so it just really, I think, brought more meaning to my life and what I was fighting for. And I wasn't just fighting for like these couple people that I met. I was fighting for all the people in the world who really don't know what's going on when it comes to these dreams, and really had to look at them even through a scientific lens, because without that science, a lot of people say some wild stuff, and I've heard everything under the sun, and a lot of it complicates people's grief without people knowing it. And so from there, I then didn't have a PhD program, and then so I went to Brock, and the first meeting I had with a potential supervisor there, she basically let me down gently, saying that she wasn't that there was no work in dream research, and that she would help me maybe find a different path. And I basically said, like, it wasn't dreams I cared about. I wanted to research these specific dreams. And like in a matter of like a minute, like something clicked in her mind, and she was right on board. And she has been such a help ever since to get me to where I needed to be and allow me to really raise awareness on the topic that I needed to, because most supervisors would never have done that. They would say, publish, 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 and don't worry about the other stuff. But she said, no, like, follow your heart, do what you need to do to fulfill whatever you're trying to fulfill, because she knew it was close to my heart. And so I published, yes, in this area, but I also did a lot of sort of meaningful stuff with the podcast and just raising awareness in general. And the conversations I've had with people has really made my life so meaningful. Not only because I can talk about something real like grief, which tends to be avoided in most conversations, but I get to have that connection with people, to sort of be that, usually one of the few people in their lives to actually listen to them. And I think like the more people someone can have in their life that actually listens to them and like acknowledges what they're going through, the better they can work through their emotions and also help people as they move forward. So this has really started with my own dream, knowing it was meaningful, but it's really other people just had questions and needed answered, and there's just a pull for me and the right people in place for me to be able to be here where I am today.
Yeah, I mean, I've got like so many questions, and also understanding grief and dream, not only based on your experiences of working with different people, but also wanting to understand grief, loss, dream from different epistemic perspective. One of the things, as I'm actively involved in the areas of production, dissemination of knowledge to understand human experiences, and you and I, perhaps, and we will not disagree on the fact that in human experiences is subjective, that how things are, what things mean, and how things are. One of the things I personally wonder, and this is probably coming from a perspective of social psychology, not as much as like directly psychology, is that understanding that in a capitalistic society, in order to understand our emotions, in order to process our feelings and emotions, when in a capitalistic mode of production, of different kinds of emotions we are capable of experiencing. Happiness is just one of them, but we have the capacity of experiencing many, many, many other kinds of emotion, like grief, melancholy, sadness, and all of that. Would you say that grief, or processing the emotions that we have within us, has not gotten the right amount of attention? Why why some of the reasons? Do you think that in the Western society, particularly the societies that are hyper capitalistic, very individualistic, what are some of the reasons why these emotions don't get proper attention for understanding and researching?
Well, I think that's an easy one. And
Mhm.
that's basically, if you understand your emotions, you're going to be a poor consumer, because a lot of our a lot of our need to consume is because we're not feeling right inside, and we look external to sort of fill those voids. And so for a capitalist society, that's great, make them
Mhm.
feel, make them feel these negative feelings and be uncertain about what they're feeling, so they'll just go outside to try to buy a bigger house or to buy a boat, buy a car, go drink and avoid your emotions. That's great because they're making money off that, so why would they change that? And so these dreams, and just like in general, like my whole big thing is, can I figure out how I feel? Like no one's teaching
Mhm.
me, right? Like
Mhm.
public school doesn't teach you, like man, like it's just like, it's amazing how no one really fully understands how to
Mhm.
talk about their feelings and how to really explore them in a way to really
Mhm.
understand the underlying mechanisms on why they're feeling what they're feeling. And that, like, I'll actually share, like, it wasn't, I was actually exploring my feelings a little bit prior to my dad dying. And it was because I had a dream. And so in my life, so let's go back. I had a lot of negative dreams in basically my entire childhood. My dad was abused alcohol, and it was a really unsafe environment for the most part. And I had a lot of negative dreams. And one thing about dreams is that they reflect our waking life. So if we're going through stress and trauma, you're going to have more negative dreams. And so that's what I was having. And so my parents, coming from a Christian home, told me that those dreams were from the devil. So they never actually explained to me why I was having these dreams. They just made me fear these dreams. So I don't remember a lot of dreams. I probably, had a lot, but maybe decide not, like the mind maybe just decided not to remember them just because they were so frightening, believing that it was a devil trying to harm me. But it was after high school, I had a serious relationship, and the individual cheated on me, and I felt so much pain. And it was a feeling I've never felt before. It was different than grief. This was like, it was a very raw feeling. I didn't really know where it was coming from. I couldn't name it. It was just so much. There was anger, there's sadness, there's betrayal, all this sort of stuff. And I couldn't eat or sleep for like 3 days. It was horrifying to me, because, and no one had answers. People said, you should, find another woman, or you should come out drinking. I'm like, that's not the answer. that's not, that's not what I'm looking for. And so what happened was, I just like prayed for like the first time to just whoever was out there, to help me understand what these feelings were. Like that's where I was, and like, give me some understanding. I don't care if it's still there. Just give me something to understand where this is coming from. 'Cause I had no idea. And I was, at that time, I was projecting, I was blaming her, I was blaming him, I was blaming everyone. And so anyways, it was the first time I had a dream that was even meaningful to me. And so I'll share the dream. So I felt like I was a reporter, and I was running down the stream, and I was going like over hills and under bridges, and it felt like 2, 3 hours. I was just following and running by the stream. And then there was it opened up to this big ocean. And to the side, there was a pier, and I saw someone standing at the pier. So I ran over to them, and it was this gentleman. And he just had this very stoic way of being. And I went up to him, and I said, "Where is it? Where is it?" As I was looking for something. And he said, he looked at me very like, those people who know things? You're probably one of them, that know things, but they don't say it. But you could tell in their eyes that they know something. And
Mhm.
also good mentors and teachers are like that too. They want to give you the answer kind of thing. They want to sort of like play with you a bit. So he looked at me, and then he said, it could be over there pointing to the left of the ocean, could be over there pointing to the right, or he said it could be over there pointing straight ahead. But then he turned to me and he said, but you know where it truly is? And then he pointed to his mind, and I woke up with like a shot of like lightning went through me. I woke up and I knew exactly what the dream meant. And for those people who just don't know, for me, it was the first time I even had a dream that was meaningful, other than the devil was trying to kill me or something. It was, and what it meant was, my pain and my suffering was actually coming from my perspective on myself and who I am. And it's because I didn't love who I was that it was affecting me so much. So it was the first time I realized, first of all, I didn't love myself, which was, a huge shock to me because I was, you'd think, oh yeah, I do, right? Like a cool guy, right? No, I didn't. And I needed her to fulfill that for me. And just the way the breakup was, it really was pulling out a truth that was already inside me that I never acknowledged. So that raw feeling was just raw truth that I haven't sat with. And so from that moment on, I've really sort of tried to pay attention to my emotions to understand where my deficits lie and how can I love myself more. And honestly, I don't recognize the person who I used to be to who I am now. And because of that too, I can hold space for people a lot better than I could before when I'm talking about grief. And grief is really, you're talking about love and how these people were a part of who you were and how you see yourself. And a lot of times when people die, a little part of how we see ourselves dies. And so my whole thing, especially with like a lot of these dreams we can talk about, is that there's this love that is trying to be maintained in yourself. And it's like, how do we love ourselves? How do we continue to love ourselves when the people who loved us are now dead? And it's really how I see it. And so we talk a lot about, how, this pandemic and grief in general really attacks that aspect. But to answer your question from before, if people loved themselves, it'd be a different world and we would buy less. And we probably wouldn't spend so much on funerals and stuff like that, which, like a lot of times we do for different reasons. But if you're just okay with who you are and have that contentment with what life is, well, then it changes everything. It changes the whole structure of the culture.
And well, that is a very, very high ask of out of a person. I'm looking at it from two different perspectives. I'll come from the point of view, being trained in critical sociology, that how do you actually understand it, and also give you the perspective about the Eastern ways of actually knowing, our journey inward. So I think you and I probably will both agree on the fact that when we grow up in a capitalistic society, particularly male, the being a guy, we are less attached to our emotion. But recently, I didn't study psychology. My life's understanding of who I am. I don't think if I didn't read psychology books, like books written by psychology, professors or writers, I don't think I could pull it through in many cases. So one of those people is actually Eric Fromm, where he talks about what you just have mentioned, that if people were content with who they are, they wouldn't buy, and therefore capitalism's ways of operating is this indefinite deferral that you are never good enough, you will never arrive. But that deficit or that inadequacy is what drives the capitalistic growth of society and economy. So if we start understanding our grief, if we start understanding our dream, that would be impossible in many cases, and a whole lot of level. Pythagoras opened a school. I've learned it yesterday from a musician in Bangladesh, that Pythagoras opened a school in India. And in order to be a pupil in that school, he wanted his students that first, can you spend 5 years in silence? And only then you can be a student. Because he was one of those believers that pretty much anything and everything that you need to know, if you can take that courageous journey to take inward, you will know. So I was wondering that, in order to have this, how can we get into a very critical conversation, that when you have talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, just to mention that you have completed 167 episodes of podcast, talking to different people from all different walks of life. In the interviews, what were some of the things that you have found out, talking to people, that kind of was like, oh my God, I've never I've never thought about it. That's sort of like taken you by surprise, or has educated you, humbled you, and also shocked you in many cases?
Well, a lot of times it's just people's grief stories and their journey. Like all I really have is my own. And it's when I hear other people's, it's always a new experience because no one grieves the same as much as people want to portray you go through these stages or this is how it should be. It's never like that. And so to hear how people work through their emotions is always a learning opportunity for me because I always gain tips for myself and others who are and going through similar circumstances in the sense of even the loss, like if they're like if someone was murdered versus died by suicide versus lost a child to miscarriage. There's just so many different types of loss, and with that comes different complications, and all of that is new to me. And so the dreams do help me understand them a little bit more in the sense of what they were going through and what they need to help heal. But that, like for me, like that's the biggest thing. I'm always learning about how people grieve, how people continue bonds, and how people even forgive those along the way who've harmed them. Either they killed the person, or the person who died was someone that they had um, uh, not a healthy relationship with. And so like all that stuff is basically, that's why I love talking to people because I'm never bored. If people are open up about, their life, they're so unique and it's so original that you can't be bored if you're listening properly. Right. And for me, it's just like really gaining those listening skills the last probably 10, 12 years has been so helpful for me to sort of understand the beauty of people's lives. Even though there is very traumatic and there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of beauty in what people can get through. Like some of the stories are just horrifying, but yet here they are sharing it, and they can have a smile. Like it's not hopeless. The world is still meaningful, but yet, they went through something that if I went through, I'm like, I don't know if I could have, done what you did. But, so it's very encouraging for me to see people rise up over and over again after trauma, after stress. And it's like with the pandemic, like this is such a hard time for people to work through their emotions, to understand it. But yet there's going to be people that are constantly moving forward and becoming resilient and growing through these experiences, which is like the survival instinct of humans. Is just amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. And yeah, I know that's basically it. Yeah. I can't hear you. There you
Oh,
go.
sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Um, in terms of at a time, when the whole world is going through a very difficult time, people, I am looking at my own emotional experiences and how I felt at the beginning of the pandemic, the fear, and also knowing people that I have known for a long time, pretty much a whole life. You hear that that person is no more. Knowing young people, some of them very young, like even somebody who was my student, is no more. So
No.
And recently, not very recently, but almost it's been a month, that when multiple members of my own family have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Um, when that thing happens, you have this ominous thought that crosses your mind. So when my oldest brother got tested positive for COVID, I remember for the entire day or two, I was just trying to come to terms with it, the fact that he's COVID positive, and he is one of those people who is pathologically optimistic when it comes to like in any challenges or difficulties, and that nothing is gonna. But then again, I'm also an avid reader. I want to understand the world critically. So I see a lot of people whose pathological optimism didn't actually make them, survive against COVID-19.
Right.
When you hear stories from people, and when you hear that how people coming to terms with many hard and difficult realities of their life, especially they're losing their loved ones. What I know, studying a little bit of psychology, that how our brain operates in two mode. One is like the focus mode, the other one is diffuse mode. And how a lot of the people who think about a lot of things, you have mentioned just moments ago, that dreams um, are directly connected to what we are experiencing in our awake stage, in our
Mm-hmm.
conscious stage. So, in terms of processing grief, I sometimes feel that at least we have that window where we sleep, where at least we are not knocked for work, where I personally will have to agree now that I've been living in Canada almost for 7 years, is that a lot of the traumas that we experience we don't recognize, but they keep on piling up in our unconscious. And then and also we are like running and running and running, like some kind of invisible rope tied around our neck, just going. um, I once had a very strange dream that gave me an insight to my reality. I am reflecting just right now in our conversation, as I just have said this thing to you, and I was thinking how interesting how the consciousness works. So I once had a very engaging conversation with sociology grad student, and I was telling them that how we are not free when in the dimension of space and time together. When we're free in the space of time, we're not free in the space of dimension in a space, and when we're free in the space of space, we're not free in the space of time. So when Joshua is in his house at 8 o'clock in the morning, or 10 o'clock right now, um, you are free in the space of, you are right now at home at 10 o'clock. If you wouldn't be here, you you can't claim that you have a very accurate understanding of the space of your house at 12 o'clock if you're not there. Like, we can't have access of time and space at the same time. So I was telling that we're in a prison anyway, in a capitalistic mode of production, that when you're in a jail, yes, you're stuck in between in dimensional space, but in terms of time, you don't have any office to go, you don't have any assignments to finish on time. So I had this dream, vivid dream, where I saw that there is a giant clock that had this, the hour hand, that had a rope that is tied with my neck. Not exactly something that is, choking me, but like some kind of chain. And as the clock is going, I'm walking with it. And I felt that time was strangely ruling my ways of being, my consciousness. My consciousness is trying to free from the dimension of time, but time is dictating who I am. And in that dream, I was thinking that how could I find a space between the spaces, moment between the moments, where I can be free from that chain. I didn't realize that when I went to Canada, obviously, I spent my entire life in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, you are not so haunted by timeliness. I have used the expression very deliberately that, God forbid, if I, like, in our previous conversation, the first time, when we had our conversation scheduled, and my brother was tested, he tested positive for COVID, and I was going through something that was like, and I completely skipped my mind. But then when I got the message from you, I had the ability to forgive myself.
Okay.
And then I apologized to you, said to you that, hey Joshua, this has happened. But this being comfortable with myself did not come when I was in my early 20s. It wasn't there. Mid 20s, not at all. Like, I was dictated by that. In your experience through the research and talking to hundreds of people, What are some of the unprocessed emotions that you have seen unveiling in front of you? I was like, oh wow, that's something. Did you pay attention to that feeling? Like, oh, that was probably brooding on your unconscious mind, and you have co-understood something that didn't actually come to our mind immediately, readily.
It's very interesting how you
Mhm,
just said talking about the time and grief is, it can really be timeless in many
mhm,
ways. Same like
mhm,
trauma, and people don't recognize that. And
mhm,
so I think, especially when you don't deal with the emotions properly, they do become timeless. They are the chains around your neck, and you think you are free because you're not crying, right? A lot of
mhm. Yeah,
people
that's right.
believe that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm,
But it's not true. It's still governing your behavior in ways you don't know. And that's why I love psychology so much, is because it's
mhm,
really showing where these chains lie. And
mhm,
you develop them all throughout your childhood, how you see the world, your culture, everything on
mhm,
the chains that hold you down to feeling more free, or actually choosing, actually having, like, I think, appropriate choice, because a lot of our
mhm,
choices that we pick are based on past experiences. So you can't really say that it's free will per se. No, like, you
mhm,
have everything behind you governing which choice you should take based on different experiences. So when it comes to the grief itself, it's just getting people to realize that they're not over it, right? Like, the reality is we're always working through and incorporating grief within our life. If it's from the death of a loved one, if it's from something else, but all of those experiences are pulling at different things within us. And those are the things that help us realize where those, what you call quote unquote change, is just where our boundaries are on how we see ourselves and how we see life. And there's a lot of different religions have different ways of trying to free the mind, almost in a way, um, and to rise above sort of the sensations that we have. But yeah, really, like, the biggest thing is if you can just notice the ways in which you are not processing, or the ways you're trying to processing that may not actually be that effective. As I said, like with my dad with the drinking, not effective in dealing with grief. Great at an avoidance of grief, which some say that is dealing with in some way. True, and avoidance isn't bad in the short term. We kind of need that to survive, but in the long term, and that chronic avoidance, that's where it becomes very detrimental to you being healthy and you being joyful and happy and providing a space for people to be able to share and to be able to feel heard. Like, you see all this, like we talk about, social justice. If people just acknowledge your feelings, like, like, we wouldn't be blaming everyone, and we wouldn't be like attacking people. We would be sitting with them and listening. And so, really, that's sort of where a lot of the talks, even on the podcast, go, is just listening to people, hearing them, and acknowledging what they're going through, and also asking meaningful questions. Like, it's amazing what one question can do to shift someone's perspective and how they think they're dealing with their loss. There's a couple times people think that they're not, or they haven't dealt with something. I'm like, with everything that you're saying and your behavior, you've actually worked through this a lot. So why do you think you haven't? And so you sort of piece that together, and it's amazing how your mind, like how you sort of see a situation, doesn't make it real. That's the story you're telling yourself. But an outsider can actually um, point towards maybe a different reality that you just haven't seen, and that may be the one you've been longing to have. It's just that shift can change everything in someone's life, like it did for me. I was so angry, and like, with that girl cheating on me, I was so angry. All of a sudden I have this dream that tells me that it's because I didn't love myself and I need to work on that. All of a sudden, like, dude, I didn't care what she did. I'm like, dude, I got something I can do. I got something that's actually meaningful to me in my growth. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And I would say I was saved by a dream, and dreams have always been has almost been my best friend, in the sense of telling me the truth about who I am and what I'm dealing with. Because like, as with just humans and just ourselves, we constantly lie to ourselves to make ourselves feel better. It's just it's an amazing adaptive quality humans have, right? So dreams really provide a window into what you're not acknowledging, and that is the beauty of life, and that's the beauty of best friends too, and just people telling you the truth in a loving way, is that you're seeing something that you've been avoiding without knowing it.
Yeah, Joshua, what you just said, I love it. Um, that I think one of the, you know, how writers have the capacity of changing your perspective through powerful
Mm.
lines. Um, Dostoevsky did something for me when I was running away from a lot of the unprocessed griefs and difficulties of my life in my mid 20s and very early 30s. Um, Dostoevsky warned us by saying that be careful of the lies that you say to yourself, because
Mm.
as we continue, lying to us, at one point we start believing in them,
Mm. Right.
uh, and
Yeah.
that is dangerous. That is a self-imposed prison.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think, as I'm growing older, I'm realizing is to slow down in true sense, not in the new
Mm.
agey way. That in true sense, understanding that a lot of the griefs, a lot of the losses that exist in us was socially engineered, was indoctrinated. You
Mm.
mentioned about our belief system. You mentioned about your experience of hearing from your parents that dreams come from devil, and hence
Mm.
what
Yeah.
that does to you, to anybody. And when we teach our young kids, I'm an educator, and being a parent is incredibly important for me to understand that actually how we actually interact with kids, and what do we tell our kids to understand the world, ahead of us. Question: what do you think is some of the biggest misconceptions about grief and dream that you have found? Completely misconception, completely
Yeah.
misconceptions, but also trying to tackle them is not easy. Like, for instance, um, we are afraid of truth,
Yeah.
um, very much. We are very, very afraid
Yeah.
of truth, right? So this question is, I want to predicate this question with this comment, is as I grow older, I think the memories that we have, it changes meaning.
Mm.
The memory, what happened, what it meant to me when I was in my early 20s, and what it means to me now. That
Right.
the event is same, but the meaning of the memory changes, right? So,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest misconceptions or things that you have found, and what are some of the challenges you found to tell in conversation to people who are participant in the conversation?
Well, it's just great to also preface that, the challenges differ based on people's culture and religious beliefs. And so, like a lot of what I'm going to talk about is, a lot of from the Western perspective on what people have said around me. But yeah, like as you go to different cultures, there's going to be misconceptions there too. And even within religions and, yeah, even in other religions, the way people look at dreams in the same religion and grief differs. And so it's very hard to say like this is it. But I'll share some of them.
Mm-hmm.
So with grief, a lot of people think that the best one of the ways of coping with grief is just to just avoid it, and so they don't cry because crying is a sign of weakness. They don't, and so when people aren't feeling anymore the grief, they think they're over it, and so that's a big misconception. Is that no, you're just avoiding it. You're not actually. You haven't worked through it, and so to get people on that track. Other times it's like when it comes to these, I like to say these. The other thing too with grief is that people think you go through stages, and you don't really go through stages. It's like a whirlwind. Like you could be acknowledging a loss, and then you have this sort of acceptance, and then 2 weeks later, this wave hits you of grief. That's common. That's okay. And that's another sort of, a lot of people think, oh no, something must be wrong with me. I'm still grieving. So they look at time, as we talk about sort of the trappings of time. A lot of people would say, well, like in our culture, you have 3 days to grieve, right? Because you had 3 days off work. So you're supposed to be done grieving in that time. And other cultures, you get a year, you get to mourn for a year. That's great. I love timetables, it gives you a goal. But like they're not meaningful in any way. It's because you are a unique individual and you have to process everything through your own lens, through your own time frame, and based on when you can process it. Because if you're a single mom and you lost a child and you have to go to work and do like the time you have to grieve is very little and to process that, because you're also caring for your children's grief. And so a lot of times, like parents, they'll forget about their own grief because they focus on their children's, which is, it is beautiful that they care so much about their children, but they really need to also understand they got to also set the model and take care of their own grief, and that it's okay to cry. And one of the big things with men, well, I think with a lot of people, but men especially, is that crying is a sign of weakness and it should be avoided. My dad taught me that, and I love it. I'm still working on that. But what's interesting is when when my dad died, and I cried. It was probably the first time I cried in like 20 years. And so the tears were so painful because like the ducts were just stuck. That's what my theory. Because they just weren't in use. And so, but that's how good I was at being the perfect son to my father, right? And that's the model I portrayed. And now I realize, no, that was a bad model to go off of, because it actually hinders you in many ways. And I've spent time with my feelings and the sadness to be able to cry. And like, you're not going to cry for 24 hours. I think that's impossible. But if you give yourself, your body knows what it wants to do. If you give yourself the space to just feel things out, it's amazing how it comes and it goes. And so now when I do cry over something, it'll come and then it'll pass by. But what I'm finding is that because I can cry when I'm sad, I'm also crying when I'm joyful. So I'm reaching, because I'm able to go lower in my emotional feelings, I can go higher in the sense of that peace and that joy. And it's just like, it's amazing when we restrict our emotions, we're actually closing not just the negative, but we're also closing the positive without even knowing it. And so we're in this little box, and that's why we can't go anywhere, because we have to feel it all. And so, for me, that's been a very important thing. And like the last time, my dad's been dead for 12 years now, and I just graduated 2 years ago. So 10 years, he's been dead when I graduated. And when I was on stage, so like, when you get a PhD, you get to stay on stage with all the professors. I had this huge emotional reaction to that, knowing that I was there because my dad died, and he also couldn't be there to witness where I was. And I just had this overwhelming sadness. And I cried a little bit, but I didn't want to go full-fledged on stage. So after that, after the ceremony, I went to the car and I was able to let it out. And I must have cried for 5-10 minutes, just feeling it out. And it takes courage to feel your emotions, because a lot of people get scared because they haven't really felt their emotions before. So it's scary. But it just, if you have the courage to feel it, it'll work through itself. You don't have to know why you're crying. Just cry. Your body knows what it's doing. Like, you got to trust it. And, with that, that's what I see with grief anyways, is allowing yourself to feel. It's one of the big things people need to do. And the misconception is if you don't feel, you're over your grief, or you work through it, which is not true. So when it comes to dreams, this is where we get a full-fledged of weird stuff going on, even more so because no one's really done research in the area. So people are just like making stuff up based on past experiences, based on what people in power have said to them. So, like that's in like, how do the people in power know what's going on with these dreams? And they don't, right? They just don't. So they're giving really strange advice to people. So like when I started researching this topic, I went to my mom's church, who, that's where they got these ideas that dreams were from the devil, right? Because they were in this certain type of church. And so I went there and I asked him about these experiences, about these dreams of the deceased and what he thought they were. And he said at first that they're the devil in disguise. I was like, oh, so that's what you tell your people who are grieving that have this experience. And I go, but these dreams are still loving, right? Like, okay, I can see like maybe they're torturing them or they're chasing them, it's a negative dream. But most of these dreams are very positive and loving, that they're saying that they love them, that they're okay, or they're in heaven or something. I go, how do you explain why they're so positive? And he just had nothing to say. And I said, oh. And then I said, if Jesus, right, who has died, I go, if he comes in the dream, is that the devil in disguise? Right? It's the same thing. It's someone who is alive that's dead. Grief dream. And he said, yes, that would be true, because the devil can't disguise as Jesus. I was like, oh, yeah. I go, what about, this is just me. I go, what about Jesus with the deceased? I got like a ton of those dreams, right? So, he didn't know what to say, and he's like, and he couldn't give me an answer. He didn't know what to say, because I trapped him in a way that what he thought was real was now, it basically fought against each other. And so, did he change his ways? I don't think so. I think he'll still, because that's how he was trained in the way he looked at dreams. But to understand that these people, they think they know, but they really don't when you really press them. And that's why the research is so important, because I need to do the research for people to take this seriously, first of all, and second of all, to give more soundful advice on what's going on. And if everyone's having these experiences, or most people are having these experiences after a loss, there's something about them that we should know about. Because all you need is someone to say that weird thing about, a positive dream is from the devil, to change their grief completely. So they could have found it very comforting and helped them with the bond to know that they're okay, that they made it to heaven, and so and so. Once you say that, all of a sudden, all the things and comfort that they once got are now eliminated, and now you put the stress on it. And it's not like you can control these dreams. So if they have another dream, it may be negative because the person now dealing with the negative thing of thinking these dreams are going to be from the devil. So they mimic that in a way. And so you're like, what are we doing here? We just made a mess of a situation that was the body was trying to heal itself in its own way. And we're making a mess on trying to tell what that means. And, that's not just Christianity, but, it's funny because some people in Christianity, they actually said, no, like, you can. These dreams are from God. It's the way that, like, it's the soul and stuff like that. And I said, great, man. Like, it's just nice to know people can be. It's nice to see that it wasn't just like every Christian had this idea. It's just like just these certain beliefs, but they're everywhere. Like even in Buddhist religions, there's some Buddhists who believe after 2 years, the soul should be reincarnated. So if you have a dream after 2 years of the deceased, it means that they haven't reincarnated, and that's a negative thing. And an unreincarnated soul can hinder you in your health in some way. So what happens, right, when you have these positive dreams afterwards? Well, what could be a positive experience, like they say they love you, which is a common thing, they get distressed because of this belief that they need to be reincarnated within 2 years. Time again, right? Like the time keeps coming back. But like, I don't know where they got this 2 years from. There's no research on it. Like, why not 2.5 years, right? Like, can it be delayed? Like, but
can it have a session jam?
Yeah, because like just in my research, there's no time limit. Like these dreams don't stop, and they continue at end of life. Like so, when people are end of life, they'll dream of the deceased, comforting them and helping them transition from life to death. So these dreams never stop. And for people to make a time limit on this stuff is, I find, really ridiculous in my mind. But then here comes the capitalism to then stop these dreams. So a priest, so the Buddhist priest, you have to pay a merit, and then they will try to do something to make the soul reincarnate faster, right? So I'm like, if I would start a religion, I would definitely have that within it, because you make a lot of money. Because these dreams, you can't control these dreams as much as you want to. And so by paying a priest to do something that doesn't need to be done, like it seems like a lost cause. And for me too, you see the complication that's going on here. So the person thinks that as long as they remember these dreams, they'll have to pay, right? So now you have people who are poor to become poorer. If and like, how do you deal with this stuff? And what happens if the dreams continue, right? Which there's an example of this in one of the papers I read. So the priest, got the mirror, got the stuff, nothing worked. So what he said was, you have to fly back, because the person was in North America, you have to fly back to Cambodia and do this type of ceremony where the person died for it to actually work. So I'm looking at this thinking, like, so now you got to spend another, what, $3,000, plus you got to pay another priest. And, at the end of the day, like, if we just looked at the dream, it's telling her something about what's going on, and this is why it's so important to have actual research, because what was probably going on is that she was still dealing with the trauma of the loss. And so without dealing with the trauma, you're going to continue to have these negative dreams. And I'm guessing they're negative in the sense that they kept putting it in, they weren't stopping in any way. So they're repetitive. So, if we just talked about them and released and just acknowledge that we don't sometimes know why we have these dreams, is a big step, because we don't. And I'm still working to try to figure some of the stuff out. But when it comes to dreams in general, one of the things I did look at was, why do some people have these dreams and others don't? Because another complication I heard a lot of was people were very jealous if someone else had a dream of the loved one and they didn't. And so they thought, whoa, are they mad at me? Why aren't they, quote unquote, visiting me? Or why haven't I had that? And so a lot of people, when things don't happen the way they want to, they have a perspective that they usually choose to go with, and it tends to be a negative one. So they'll say, or even if someone doesn't, like, if no one has had a dream, they'll say, oh, maybe they didn't cross over, or maybe he's mad, or they're mad at me because I couldn't give that funeral they wanted, or I had to sell the house, because, like, when someone dies, there's so many changes and secondary losses, and there's so many emotions you have to deal with. And so maybe that's why I'm not doing it. And so they complicate their grief by making an assumption on why they're not having a dream. So that was one of the main things I really wanted to look at, especially my PhD. And what I found was dream recall was the most important thing. So what it's saying is, people who remember dreams in general more, those are the people that are more likely to have these types of dreams. And 10% of the population doesn't remember their dreams that often, if ever. And so that's 10% of the population that won't have one of these types of dreams. And just by making that connection, people have just, like, you tell, like, this wave of, like, relief has come over them just with that simple thing. But other people, I've heard a ton of things, like, with people and what they say, like, oh, they're in purgatory, or they can't yet, or your grief is too strong, you can't receive it. Like, I haven't seen any of that. I did look at grief, and grief actually is not tied with dreams of the deceased per se, but it's tied with more frequent awakenings while you're sleeping. And the frequent awakenings are what can lead to more dreams, just because you have a more chance of having a dream the more you wake up during the night. And so that's where that sort of link lies, not in anything else. So, it's just really using science to explore a topic to try to alleviate some of the misconceptions that people have felt throughout. And then another thing is, why is someone having positive dreams versus negative dreams? And, that's another big one. And so there is trauma. If people who have suffered a traumatic death, basically traumatic death, you're going to have more negative dreams. And so you see this a lot too with PTSD, where you see the deceased dying again or ill, which is very common. But you don't need to have PTSD to actually have these dreams, which is, like, something to know. It's just you're trying to work through the trauma, and your mind's trying to work through it with you. And that's the big thing. Your mind's not against you while you're sleeping. It's trying to help you out and work and consolidate these memories and try to work through the grief, to help you out. And these dreams, if you know how to look at it, you can sort of see where people are blocked, or where people need maybe to focus their attention on in waking life to explore those issues. I remember there was this woman who had this dream of the deceased basically coming back and basically saying he wanted all the money that she inherited, that if she gave it back to him, then he'll leave her alone. And she took this as, like, a negative visitation, right? And so all of a sudden and then he said, like, then because she wouldn't give back the money, all of a sudden he started to chase her and her new boyfriend. And so she, right? Like, and so when you play with the imagery, like, what's actually going on? Is this really a negative visitation? And like, say, I don't know what's going on in the afterlife, but I know a little bit about human behavior and dreams. So sort of, maybe it's not that. Let's try to see if it's something else first. And so, when you look at that, there's two big things. The first thing is this inheritance. And then when you ask her about it, she says the inheritance has been the worst thing that's happened since the loss, because she felt it was an injustice that he worked so hard for it and she gets to now enjoy it. And so there's this almost sense of injustice that she hasn't really acknowledged and worked through. The other thing was she started this new relationship, and she's probably spending some of the money that she got on this new relationship. And it's hard to love two people, like our culture is really like, it's a shame, right? Like, in the sense that we close our heart and we sort of minimize and say we can only love this person. But like, people who lose a spouse and then date again, you can love both still, but the mind wants to sort of, and maybe the other person too, I'm not really sure that situation, may want you to just focus the love on them, right? And that's just people who need love, that's what they would want, right? And so there's an issue there about dealing and working with what it's like being in a new relationship. So guaranteed, 99% chance, if you work on those two things, that dream will actually change to something positive. And so the theory goes that as you work through those emotions and those negative dreams, or just those negative emotions in waking life and those unresolved issues, those dreams will change to something more positive. And it's more common and more frequent to have positive dreams of the deceased, which is actually very surprising given after trauma and after just dreams in general. People dream more negative stuff, but after trauma, it's even more negative. But when it comes to these dreams that have the deceased in it, they tend to be very positive images. And that in itself is a mystery that we're still trying to understand, but it showcases something unique about what's going on in the mind. That when the deceased is in there, they're special in some way. And you see this after pet loss, also miscarriages. They dream of the unborn baby in different ways. And all that sort of stuff can help regulate our emotions, which is a beautiful thing, especially like for me. I think that was one of the major things. Since I was in a deep depression, I was having a hard time regulating emotions. I was just numb. And so that dream of my father allowed me to feel that joy, and then allowed me to feel that sadness again too. So with that, I was able to sort of problem solve and process things a lot differently, which is one of the things I found in the research that it actually does. The other thing is continuing a bond with the deceased. And so when we talk about misconceptions, people have a misconceptions on what it means to continue a bond. And so when you continue a bond, it doesn't mean like you believe in the afterlife. It just means you're maintaining that relationship with the person who has died. And that could be through memories, through shrines, through going to the gravesite. Some people see a coin or butterfly, or you talk to them, or you have a dream, right? All these different things are different types of continuing bonds, and they're okay. And they're okay to have. Freud, gotta love the guy. He really pressed the fact that continuing bonds were a negative thing in grief, and it was actually an avoidance strategy from dealing with the loss. And so he really petitioned that you shouldn't be talking about the grief. You should just put your stuff on to what's real now and not on the past. And so a lot of people took that up because they took his word as gold. And so there's a lot of misconceptions that are still here today. Like if someone's I don't know, holding on to a deceased sweater, they may say, "Oh, he's not over that loss yet," or "He's gone crazy. He's talking to the deceased." No, that's not. Like maybe there's, like depends on like where. If the person acknowledges the person's dead, that's the big step. But if you can acknowledge that and still carry this bond on, there's nothing wrong with that. And my research has shown that there's nothing wrong with that, and it actually can help people through the grieving process. And there's two different types of continuing bonds that, one's more internalized, so it's more deliberate type of continuing bond. And these are more comforting. So this is like sharing stories like we're doing now, and also like on the podcast. Mm-hmm. That actually can be very beneficial for a lot of people. Even these external bonds, like sometimes people will see the deceased or maybe hear or feel or touch, or they feel the touch of them or they smell them, which is very interesting. But those can also lead to if they're comforting, if it's comforting, can actually help in the loss. What's interesting, this going off tangent, but interesting about the different types of continuing bonds is that those external type, the more intrusive forms, and they actually tend to be more distressing also. Those types of continuing bonds are predicted, or what predicts those are trauma and avoidant attachment. So the feeling here that I feel that's going on is that when you're not acknowledging your grief, right, and continuing this bond, right, talking about it, remembering parts of who they were and maybe what they would do now with you, or be with you, what happens is you're shutting yourself off. And so the mind's trying to get you to acknowledge them. So it's almost, you could see it as the mind's way of getting you to acknowledge your grief. Because if avoidant attachment style is linked to external continuing bonds, it's saying those are the types of people that don't process their emotions. They suppress them. And so if they're having it, it's saying something about suppressing your emotions. So that's one of the theories on why some people have those experiences. But they're normal. It's a normal thing. But the more education we can have around these experiences, the more we can sort of play with maybe why they're occurring, to be able to talk about some real stuff rather than shying away from it or calling someone crazy. No, let's talk about it. Let's see what's going on. We're all learning here. And the biggest thing when it comes to dreams isn't really the dream content per se. It's people's perceptions on the dreams. And that's what we were talking about before. Like someone can have a very positive dream, but can be very distressed based on their perspective. And if you can shift someone's perspective, all of a sudden, as you're shifting everything, you're shifting how they're looking at their emotional state. You're looking at how they look at their grief. So negative dreams, as much as you could say it from the devil, great, but there's nothing to do, right? If you can say that these dreams represent our waking life and can look at it through that lens, all of a sudden there's things that you can look at to understand, what am I not dealing with? What can I actually work through a little bit more that I think maybe I've already processed that I really haven't? That's usually the case. There's just stuff we haven't processed yet. And I'll talk about my pandemic dream later on, but that's like one of the big things. But like the positive dreams, right? Like that, there's a reason why they're occurring. And so I've had doctors talk to people and say that their dream was because of a medication they used. I said, what? I said, what? There's no study on that, because if there was, I'd be a millionaire. Give someone a pill, get a dream, man, that'd be amazing. But it's not true. So that person was basically sharing their dream, which was a positive dream, and then they basically minimized it, saying it was because the thing, it wasn't real. It was because of the medication. That's not true. It's not true. But this is the stuff that, when you ask a doctor, he's going to say it's a pill. And you ask someone out, like a priest, he's going to say it's the devil, right? Like it's amazing what people come to give reasons on why people are having these dreams, rather than just saying, I don't know. And maybe there's some research on it and let me look. But that's, I think, the biggest challenge we have when it comes to grief itself, is for people to say, I don't know, and to actually do research before they answer the question. But yeah, like the one I want to do mention too, when we talk about these dreams, is that they're actually really frequent. Like they're so common. Like, so after a spousal loss, within the first year or two, 86% of people had a dream of the deceased spouse. After pet loss, it was 76% within the first 6 months. And after miscarriage, it was 58% within the first year. These are huge numbers to not have any real research on the topic. And you got to think, like, we've been dreaming since probably the beginning of time. And so like these experiences aren't new, but the culture, for whatever reason, had decided not to investigate them. And I think that's the most interesting part of it all, that it took me to try to actually figure this stuff out in 2010 or 12 when I started this thing. But like, why? Like, what was so scary about this stuff that people avoided it? And, but I don't know. I still don't know. But here we are now. And I'm just glad it's providing a lot of people a lot of comfort. And it's a giving people a different perspective on dreams that they can easily find now. Before, there wasn't anything out there. There wasn't a website. There wasn't a podcast. You'd go on these medium websites or whatever, where mediums are saying why, or you have these priests saying, it's just like no one knew. And so it's nice that there's this information now. And it's, like there's 4 studies I did. So it's nice that there's something you can say, maybe this is it instead, and let's work on that.
Yeah. I've got quite a few things from our conversation. So one of the things I want to uh, talk to that when you mentioned about crying um, and feeling the emotion, you have touched on something incredibly important, uh, which I have figured out reading a book that's called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris.
Hmm.
He talks about that, and that definition was really helpful for me when you said that the feeling of depression is actually not feeling anything, it's the numbness. I
Yeah.
think the understanding of depression often gets misunderstood. If you're feeling sad, in many instances, that gets
Mm.
oh, you are depressed, but
Right.
it is the ability to feel. We are sentient beings, and that
Mm.
is a miracle, right? I wouldn't have it any other way. So I think now, I think young age is overrated, like really overrated. I don't want to be. If somebody would, give me an option, do you want to go your mid-20s? I would say no, thank you, sir. I don't want to go there. Um, I'm happy where I am.
Yeah.
I I have never been this comfortable feeling my emotions
Mm.
and crying when I feel crying, and taking that understanding. One of the things that you have mentioned about people who are defining or labeling dreams coming from devil and all of that, it is very hard for somebody to understand that once we take on an identity,
Mhm.
our intellect can get enslaved by that identity.
Mm.
Because if that identity is connected to a set of belief or set of ideology, and we have plenty of them around us all the damn time, you either you support Doug Ford or you don't support Doug Ford, and therefore
Mhm.
everything and anything he does. So we look at things tribally, which is connected to belief, and
Mhm.
it has served our purpose in the evolutionary process. Stanford evolutionary biologist, Robert Sapolsky talks a lot about it. You have mentioned earlier on that, how so many things that lurks beneath us have the ability to influence us, but we don't understand it.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing, one of the philosophers, he died in actually 2011. Herbert Fingerty. He taught philosophy at the University of California, San Diego, for about 40 years. And this professor, has written extensively on death. And in his youth, he thought about the philosophical understanding of death and why
Mm.
there isn't much to be afraid about death.
Mm.
And this is when he's able-bodied, etc. And when he was in his, I think it was 97, 98, there was a beautiful report on him by, I think, his grandchildren, grandson or granddaughter, when he's in his like almost 100 years. Now, as he was like, he researched about death. He has written extensively on self-deception, and how we lie to ourselves
Mm.
and all of that. At that time, he was scared of death
Mm.
in his, you know, fragility. And he says that, the hardest thing to come to grips with is actually losing the ability. Um, and this is going to be something that is very interesting to you. When he was asked that, what is it that he misses most from his life? And he talks about memories with his spouse. I
Yeah.
mean, the time he has spent, with his spouse, and what has created the and one thing that he mentioned in that article, that he doesn't take a lot of things for granted. Like he uh, he had a house in New York. Now he sits at the porch and sees the leaves, just sways in wind, and he appreciates it.
Mm.
So I was trying to understand the link between death, dream, and grief. Um, and it's kind of hard to talk about certain things which can potentially hurt someone's feelings if it is connected to belief.
Mm.
Uh, and not all communities in the world are very tolerant towards um, their beliefs being challenged or questioned. Let's just put it that way. Let's just
Yeah.
put it that way. I think in a way that you were lucky that you went to the church and you had a conversation with the people, and to be able to have that conversation safely. It's
Yeah.
not the case everywhere in every culture in every society. Probably many places in Canada, like I don't think it would be easier to have that kind of conversation. Um, so in in terms of grief, death, and dream, is have you met anybody who has experienced death in their dream?
I've probably heard about it like here and there, but it's not something that really comes up in the sense of their own death. Um, I've heard of a bunch of times people would say they have they'll see that a person that's alive dead. But that's a little bit more common to me. And so some
Mhm.
people will sometimes even see them as precog, and they get really anxious because they're like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe it's a sign that my son's going to be is dying or he's going to be dead.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just understanding a lot of people just don't have literacy when it comes to dreams and how to understand dreams. There's been a lot of research on it. And just by realizing it, most of our dreams represent our waking life in some way. And some of them are very passive in the sense of, if you're anxious when you're going to bed, you're going to have more negative dreams. And if you're a little more happier, you're going to have more positive dreams. That's an easy way to sort of look at it. So a lot of times when parents have these dreams of maybe their child dying or drowning, it's really just a fear that they have of that occurring. And sometimes you just sort of say, like, you have to, if it's, they're drowning, well, maybe, just teach them more safety around water and how to swim, that sort of stuff. But for to say it's precognitive, you're going too far. All you can do is take the precautions necessary, and dreams can help you that. But for the most part, parents have a fear that something will happen to their children, and that's sort of that parental role of protection that's coming through. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's actually a loving instinct on wanting the best for your kids. I think that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and by changing that perspective on that dream, it helps people work through those emotions of acknowledging that fear. Maybe the person was going to go swimming, in a couple of weeks at a friend's house. And so that
Yeah.
dream could also, right, like could represent that fear that's unacknowledged. And so
Yeah.
let's work with it. Let's, be proactive in teaching safety. And so um, so that's a big thing when it comes to sort of understanding the dreams. But dreams can also be be active in the sense of helping us in different ways. And you can really see that with people
Mhm.
inventing or people having problems in waking life. And
Mhm.
then in the dream, they'll have an answer, they'll be given an answer, or they'll problem solve within the dream, and they wake up and they have the solution. And you look at a lot of these dreams of the deceased, and you can really see that kind of quality that um, they're giving them something new, right? It's not just like some of them are old memories that maybe they've forgotten, which is its own really cool thing. That like memories are not truly forgotten. They can sort of come back in dreams, but they can also like sort of provide me the problem solving needed to, I think, work through some of my emotions that I wasn't acknowledging, which was saying I love you and saying goodbye. And in that moment of a dream, you don't believe it's fake. It's as real as anything in your life. And so there's something beautiful about that space in your dreams where it does seem like it is, because we're talking about timelessness. Some of these dreams are very timeless in the sense of being in a place where time doesn't exist. And,
Yeah. So I
yeah.
wanted to give you something, to like, about one particular dream that's, at least for me, it has been extremely significant, impactful. And when this has happened, I was actually in St. Catharines.
Hmm.
So and obviously coming to a new country and new culture and navigating through a lot of challenges, I do understand that that time wasn't easy for me. So I had this one vivid, and as I'm speaking to you, almost like after I had that in probably 6 years earlier or 7 years, but that vividness is
Mm.
that's when it's sort of like understanding that how dreams can be window to understanding. So
Mm.
I was born in a village, and the area gets in a very my village gets flooded and children die drowning, and it's a reality in Bangladesh. So and also I my school was beside a river, so I grew up fishing, growing crops and raising animals. So these are very it was part of my daily life. So when I was in St. Catharines, I had a dream that I was in a boat in a river, and I was not the age when actually I was in St. Catharines, and I fell into the water. But I went out for actually catching fish, like fishing.
Mm.
And as I'm drowning, in the beginning, my heart is gripped with fear, like
Mm.
that not to be able to breathe. And by no means I'm not saying that it is that people have a lot of research done on near death experience. So
Yeah.
at one point in my dream, I have accepted my death.
Oh, that's cool.
And what happened right after that, I had a transformative experience, like death changed meaning.
Mm.
And you're a dream researcher, and I thought, like, oh, this is something probably I should not forget to tell you that. But what's interesting is that experience, I felt like it has opened my heart. you know
Mm.
a lot of the fear disappeared, like a lot of the fears disappeared, and the meaning of death changed in so many perspectives. And then obviously, whenever I come across experiences that I don't understand, my usual ways of like dive into books, read books, and try to understand what other people have looked into it. And then I read a lot of literature, and one particular scholar, if you ever get an opportunity, you can probably read on his work. He's an original thinker from India. His name is Jiddu Krishnamurti. um, he connects, and this is where probably something that will intrigue you, connects between love and death.
Mm.
So we are incapable of loving somebody if we don't understand our intimacy or relationship with death. Now, let's say I'm meeting Joshua today, and whatever the conversation experience that I've had could be positive, could be negative. Now, tomorrow when I'm meeting you, if I have positive experience with you in the past, I'm not essentially meeting Joshua. I am meeting a set of perception, accumulated perception about Joshua.
Yeah.
So, and that I am interacting with image. And please, if you see, I'm trying to connect the dot. So, in our dream, we meet with the connection of images, the sort of experiences, right? And when
Mhm.
we are awake, that memory, so in our dream something comes, and it has probably something to do with memory.
Yep.
And when I'm meeting you, I'm also meeting with memory, like, I have a set of experiences, right?
Yeah.
So Krishnamurti talks about that. How can we ever love somebody? How can we ever be, truly in our heart religious? By the way, when he talks about religion, it has got nothing to do with Christianity or any. In his definition of religion is that the innocentness of mind's ever newness. Like
Mm.
I am, that Eastern Buddhist, philosophers have talked about it, that for the first time, when you're meeting with somebody, as if that you're meeting that person for the first time, not holding that person hostage to the past experience that have had, because who you are changing forever. You are not at all the same person that you were
Mhm.
2 years ago, right? So that's why I'm connecting death, dream, and love.
Mm.
And and we will always have people in our life that will be gone, but the memory are forever part of us, who we are,
Right.
right? How do you see that? I posed something to you, so think together aloud, like, totally. But I've thought a lot about it. I've shared with people that I, care about, and I feel comfortable having this conversation.
Yeah, like it's interesting to think how just even dreams in general can produce such a change in us on how we see ourselves, how we see others. It's like that one moment when death didn't just change you and how you saw death, but it changed how you loved, how you could love others and sit with others, probably in their own death. And that's the really amazing thing. And then also love doesn't die. And I think that's the other big thing that I really try to promote in a lot of
Mhm.
my talks, is that because you see it within these dreams. So if they're still in the dreams, that love, where did it go? It's still in you. It's still there. So who they were, even though they died, that love that they've given you and was a part of your life to shape you who you are is still there. And just connecting back with that feeling. Because a lot of times I think we need the external thing, right? Because we're so used to the external as being real. But actually the most real is, I would say would be love, or whatever that is, because it transcends body, it transcends time, right? Whatever. And so there's something greater than just the external shell of whatever the person does. There's a feeling. And the same thing with trauma. Trauma goes beyond time too. So that hate can also transcend, and you see the intergenerational of trauma, as it's passed down. And so, same thing with love. You'd see that too. So, that's I find that's very beautiful, and you see that with the dreams, because they're so loving. I had one dream where a widow shared a dream where her husband came back and said, "I've been to the end of time and back, and you know what? I still love you." And love is such a powerful theme in these dreams. And so when I look at why, out of all the things that could have happened in a dream, you go to Mars, you could ride on an elephant with the deceased, you can, there's a lot of things you could do, but they tend to be very simple images for the most part, and they tend to be focused on the person feeling love. And so feeling loved is such an important aspect that we're not getting in waking life, because why would they need to give it if we already had it? And so that's how I look at these dreams, because like in general, I'm still trying to love myself. I haven't got to the point where I wouldn't want or don't need these dreams anymore. But I'm working at it, right? And that's the big thing. It's like, it's a goal. Will I ever reach that? I don't know. But these dreams can help us to sort of piece back some layers so I can feel more loving, and I can be more loving as I move forward. And like I guess the mystics and those like gurus or saints, like they would probably be the ones who achieve maybe this loving quality or absolute love. But like I've never met one of those people in waking life. All I can do is see where I'm at, and if I'm growing, I don't think I'm going to be able to stop. So I'm just going to continue to grow. And also, when you talk about your experience at dying, what's going on when people die? Because I said, like, you had a dream of dying and it changed you, right? What about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
actual, right? What about the actual death? What goes through people's minds when they actually die? And you can really get a good window into what dreams are occurring when people are dying. So you can have those negative dreams that reflect the stress or the anxieties that death brings about, with the regret, things undone, unsaid. But then you also have these other dreams with the deceased more or less being present, of giving them reassurance, giving them comfort, basically giving them love. And so, like in those moments, what happens? They have this dream, they're okay with dying. Like, how crazy is that? You can have a dream, you go to bed, you're terrified of dying, have a dream of the deceased saying that they're waiting for you and they're going to be with you. Now you're not afraid of dying. And so the power of these dreams to influence our behavior in waking life is so amazing. And I don't know anything else that powerful. And that's why you really have to use discernment when you ask people's opinion on these dreams and when you interpret your own dreams. Because as you said, there's a lot of people behind you that have voices in your ear on how to interpret that dream. And, so I said like that Cambodian, or that Buddhist thing after 2 years is a negative sign. I've met other Cambodians or other Buddhists, sorry, that had a dream and say, no, like it's okay. Like they're just saying hi. They're going to reincarnate when it's time, so there's no rush, right? Other people said, no, they've reached enlightenment. They don't need to come back anymore. So just that change of perspective allowed them to feel the love. That really, I think, really what it's about, because the more we feel love, the more hope we have for humanity and for those around us in our community. And I always look at the evolutionary reason why we have these dreams, because so
Yeah.
many people are having them, right? So
Mhm.
they gotta do something with our survival as a species and us connecting
Mhm.
with not only the dead but also those living, and how that sort of reflects and how that changes. Like I wonder if we would even have survived as a species if we didn't have these dreams. And because you realize how impactful these dreams can be in the sense of providing relief from one's grief, and especially back, in time when we didn't know anything about anything. And a lot of advice that even indigenous people got were from dreams of the deceased ancestors on medicines and stuff like that. So like that was a source of where they got a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And so without that, where would we be? And so it's interesting when we talk about life. A lot of people forget to talk about the importance of dreams and why we are where we are today. And that's what we're bringing back is basically, hey, like this has always been in indigenous culture. This has always been a topic of conversation with dreams,
Mhm. Yeah, I
right?
mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's in the indigenous culture, and also like there are so many books. I will tell you.
Mhm.
I mean, it's interesting that I have grown up seeing books in my language that says interpreter of dreams, books that
Mm,
says like interpret. So I
yeah.
think the curiosity or wanting to understand dream is perhaps not new, but we
Mhm.
were wanting to understand dream. But when I was also sharing with you that my own experience of dying in a dream, now when I think about it, and how it I felt that a part of my heart opened up in a way that is very hard for me to explain in words, and I don't know if I know any words
Mhm.
of that. But now, when I think about going through uh, uh, the pandemic, the difficult situations, like in particularly,
Mhm.
I think right now we're dealing with two virus. One is the global pandemic.
Mhm.
The other virus is actually understanding that how the toxicity that we have gathered in our heart when we see that how we have treated planet Earth and how we have treated each other, particularly the racial injustice that that is unfolding in the United States and Canada. I don't think in the recent, or perhaps not at least in my own experience of being in Canada, is that this eruption, what we are seeing right now, uh, George Floyd, and in Canada, So now when I think about death,
Mhm.
the anxiety that works in me is not essentially the physical end of my life, which is like flesh and blood. No,
Yeah.
to me, there are people's love and lives that are connected to me. So I
Mhm.
sort of feel like, and this is nothing. Probably, I mean, if I want to go scientific, probably it would be Richard Dawkins' selfish gene. Like perhaps my offspring. I want to make sure that their survivability, and that's what the anxiety works in me. How do you see the grief that we are processing right now with a lot of deaths,
Mhm.
a pandemic, and also sort of in some cases which sort of like we're becoming like kind of desensitized, the number of people that are dying, like death is getting normalized, if that makes sense, like you know in terms of I don't think I will if somebody would told us that in the United States 170,000 people will die in about
Mhm.
in the span of like 6 months because of pandemic,
Mhm.
and what do you think the people of the United States are going to respond? I'm not giving the numbers of Canada, for other reasons. I don't think we would come to conclusions what we're seeing right now, like
Mhm.
what we're seeing, and also the sort of response we have seen after the murder of George Floyd, how people have went out protesting ignoring the risk of their life and how it has unfolded. And to me, it's connected. Grief,
Yeah.
to me, it's connected to love, and to me, it is also connected to death. Like love, grief, death, and how it is unfolding. I was wondering, you mentioned that you could shed some light on how the pandemic dreams, your understanding of pandemic dreams, how it is, or what have you been learning so far.
Yeah, so it's a really sad time that people are going through, and like everyone looks at the numbers of death, but the mental health, like we're not even talking about that, and how that's going to continue, even if they get a vaccine or whatever. It's destroying people's ability to cope with life. And so you'll have those people who will just avoid it. If you avoid it, it's not real, and they'll do whatever. They'll continue trying to live the life they used to live. But there's other people who are understanding, and they take it very seriously, but they become so afraid of dying themselves, or getting it, or contacting it and then passing it on to a loved one. They isolate themselves. And so they're doing it in a sense out of love, because they don't want to be the one that passes that virus on. And then there's just so many other things that are just going on that it's heartbreaking to see. Even with sort of like that George Floyd, like it's crazy how people have to die constantly for then someone to, or then for a group of people to stand up. Like this stuff was going on for generations, like, but yet it just takes a certain time where people are like, I wonder if the pandemic wasn't going on, if it would still happen. Probably not, because people are already in a state of uproar, and then that is giving them the courage to then say, let's look at this. This is, like, and I think people just need the courage. And it's like, how do we find courage in these times? And you just look around the world with the protests and stuff. That takes a lot of courage to do. And a lot of people will have courage when a lot of their things that used to be are now gone, right? The normalcy of life is now gone. And so it takes courage to fight for a new way. And that's what they're doing. And that's why I love seeing it, because I love seeing the courage, because you need that in life. You need that to face your emotions and to face your fears, and to change. Like this forced change is just upon us constantly. And so with that, a lot of people are probably having more negative dreams, as we would just know with the research. And a lot of dreams, so Deidre Barrett has done research on this, or is doing research on this. And a lot of people are dreaming of anxieties you would normally have. So people not wearing a mask in your dream, coughing on you, or trying to touch you, right? Like those are the fears we have, right? Other times you can see the virus portrayed in a swarm of bugs around you, or something chasing you, an unknown monster, which is also very good sign of the coronavirus, and since you can't see it. And so you can see this anxiety just building within us. And what do we do with it, right? How do we utilize this in some way? And so for me, I had my own dream that really helped me understand where I was, because at the time when the pandemic was going on, first started, there's that, all that stuff going on with the toilet paper, and knowing people, selling out, and like supply is going to be shortage. So you have a lot of panic, and I wasn't acknowledging it. And I thought, oh, I'm doing okay. But I was reading a lot of news. I wanted to stay informed. And then I had this dream. And so the dream was, I was in my childhood home, and there was a chandelier that was coming down. It was a very ugly chandelier. So I was kind of happy it was coming down. And then I would break off, broke off a piece of the chandelier, and I would eat it. And the glass was getting stuck in my throat, and I started to panic because I knew I couldn't get it out in time. And so I woke up. I woke up with like just a drench of sweat. It's been a long time since I had one of those types of dreams that was like that. And so I really had to take a look at my life. And I'm like, what is going on that I'm not acknowledging? And so if you look at a chandelier is something that brings light to a whole room. And so I had to look at, okay, what is that a good metaphor for in with what I'm dealing with? And it was the news. So I was reading a lot of news throughout the day and before bed. And as I should have known, but I just wasn't realizing it at the time, to produce good or news that's clickable, you want to fill it with your bias of anxiety and fear. And so as much as I'm reading for facts, I'm also ingesting the anxiety that they're putting within the words they choose, because that makes you read longer, makes you more anxious, makes you click on the next link, blah, blah, blah. And so with that dream, I was I realized the truth about what the news was actually doing to me and my state of mind. And so I had to cut back on the news. And so I'll glance maybe, once a day, maybe like during the day, but I have really dialed that down completely. And if something, someone will share something if it is desperate. But other than that, that dream gave me the understanding of I was way off track. And anytime we're in a place of anxiety and fear, our immune system is getting shot. So we're going to be sicker quicker. And if we do get the virus, we're not going to be healthy enough to maintain stable health. And also your relationships suffer if you're in an anxious environment. As we all know, we are not great to be around unless you're with another anxious person, then it's great. but we tend to see things in a very negative light, and it's very fear-based. And so the love can't really shine through when we're in that state. And so I had to really work with it and work with that truth, and to really sort of build myself back up to what I usually am. It's a very peaceful person. But you can be peaceful and acknowledge the truth at the same time. But I don't have to get caught up in the anxiety of the future. As long as I do as much as I can now, and that's what I did. So I'm like, okay, what do I need to do now to feel safe? And so I did those things. I bought those, the certain groceries on my thing. I'm like, there's nothing more I can do. Like everything will be what it needs to be. There's nothing else there. And so that allowed me to sort of reduce that. And then I was able to now provide space for other people to share their anxieties and stuff, and to hold space for that without giving them more anxiety of my own. And I could hold that for them. But yeah, so that was like my dream. So you see that, throughout with a lot of other people's dreams, they're probably having more negative dreams. And when you can understand the imagery and how it connects to your waking life, you can do some major shift to get you back to a place of love. Because even with protesting, right? When you protest with love, it's a different energy than protesting with anxiety or anger or fear is the best way to put it. But you can protest with love, and that's a more powerful statement than anything, I believe anyways. And then also when it comes to these dreams of the deceased, what I've seen is that the ones that have been shared with me, they're having positive dreams. And so I believe a lot of, because these dreams, in the beginning of loss, these dreams help us with their grief. But as we move forward in time, these dreams of the deceased help us in different areas when we're in deep grief or challenges in our life. They can give us advice or support. And you see that also now. And so we definitely need to do more research to sort of understand how it's going about. But my theory that people would be having more dreams of the deceased now, and that these dreams would be very comforting to them to maintain basically health in waking life and to provide support as they move forward through this. And I should mention too, there has been research on dreams. So people have been had an increase of dream recall. So there are people that are remembering their dreams more often. And there's a couple things that could do that. It could be the increased anxiety, the more frequent awakenings that happens because of it. The other thing that it could be is that you're sleeping longer. And so if you're sleeping longer and you're waking up in REM sleep, which is, the majority of the second half of your sleep, what happens is you have a better probability of remembering a dream. So it's about 80% versus non-REM, which is about 50%. So there's different reasons why. And then with that increase of dreaming, you're probably going to be dreaming of the deceased more too. And so people are having negative dreams of the deceased in this time. It probably has something maybe to do with the traumatic death, or maybe it's triggering something. So like in life, so what's going on now, it could trigger past traumas that, that were underneath. And so that could be coming up also. So these dreams of the deceased that maybe were traumatic, or the death was traumatic, it could be bringing those back up again also. So yeah, it's a weird time. And the more we can sort of understand our emotions, the better we are to provide that space of love, but to also make the change necessary that's needed in our culture to give everyone an equal opportunity to sort of feel, to grieve, to mourn. And we're not even talking about the issues people have now with not being able to go to the funeral. or to be able to do the ceremony in a way that is appropriate to their culture or their religious beliefs. Like that in itself is traumatic for them, because you do that routine because it's comforting, or that it leads to something in the afterlife in some way. And when you can't do that, the stress on people would be immense. And so like there's just like there's so much stuff when it comes to this that, you know, the more you dig into it, the more you see. And that's why I'm saying, like, people are resilient, and they will make it through. But, you know, like the stories of pain and trauma that people are going to be sharing throughout this for the rest of their life and to the generations next, are just going to be gut wrenching.
Yeah. Josh, it was a very informative and a very wonderful discussion. And I think we have unpacked a lot, and we have given each other a lot to reflect on, and also to go from here. The last question that I want to ask you is that, is there a direct correlation between grief and anger, and how does that, if there is any link, how does it get manifested, in our dream? Like, did you see any link anywhere?
Well, yeah, if you're angry about, you know, maybe the death of someone, a lot of times someone was at fault. It could be a drunk driver. It could even be, you know, the person took their own life, and you're angry at them. And so that can come through as anger within the dream imagery in different ways. But there's something I wanted to say on that. I had it. It was the tip of my tongue.
Like grief and anger, like how grief has a
right. Okay, that's what the other thing too is, by understanding what anger is, you can understand maybe what's going on in your dream too. So anger is really sadness in disguise. And so if you can understand that, right? Because it's funny, because men are taught to be angry but not sad, right? Like, it's okay to be angry if you're a guy, but not sad. So, but sadness is being funneled to anger. So if we just get to the sadness, the anger wouldn't be as prominent, and we'd be able to work through that a little bit more. So your dreams may be more sad, or may invoke sadness for you. So when you wake up, you're feeling that sadness that maybe you're avoiding by using anger. Anger is a great tool to avoid stuff, you know, like you see it all the time. But I haven't looked at the exact link between the two in my own research, but that's what I would think, just based on my understanding of anger in my own life and dreams in general.
Yeah. Joshua, thank you very much. We had a wonderful conversation. And, as I'm going to keep, getting more and more conversational, I'll keep you posted. And, I will catch you up in terms of, the number of podcasts you're doing. I've started late, but, I know you are my inspiration. So, I will catch you up soon.
Thanks. I appreciate it. This was fun. It was really fun to talk to you, and I'll also record it. So hopefully your audience got some benefit from it. And if they have any questions on anything when it comes to dreams, just tell them to go to my website and email me. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, that would be one. And then I will leave a link there. Just there's one observation here is given, if you can read it, is that so she's a war child. So in 1971, when the war was going on in Bangladesh, so she was adopted by a Canadian couple, and that's where she grew up, and something very unique to relate to.
It's interesting, right? But as you said, like, a doctor gives you medication so you don't dream, but the answer is in the dream. And this is sort of what I'm really trying to get through, is that there is answers within that. And, email me if you want to email me, or message me through any of my social media. We can discuss that more. Really piecing that out and together. But because it's a negative dream, right, in the sense of the pain the deceased is showing, you can sort of understand that there's probably something going on with the grief that's being unacknowledged, that we can piece apart. Also, it could be, if the person's spiritual, understanding of maybe where that person is and maybe what they're feeling there. So it's really, you really have to, when you look at these specific dreams, you have to understand the person's how the person died, their culture, religious beliefs, and also where they are in their own grief. And so that person just email me and we can talk about this afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Josh, thank you very much. We will, as you know, we will, we'll get more interesting conversations in future coming in, and I'll keep you posted. And have a wonderful day.
All right, you too. Bye.